Hi, this is the second assortment planning presentation. If you haven't already watched the first assortment planning presentation, please go back and review it now. In this presentation, we are going to talk about model stock planning and the history of assortment planning from a U.S. perspective. Within this tutorial, we will discuss an article written by Savitt in 1999. It discusses the history of model stock planning. There's also an accompanying model stock planning handout that will support the presentation and help you plan for your small business. This presentation was compiled for you by Dr. Jessica Hurst of Iowa State University, Dr. Jane Swinney of Oklahoma State University, Dr. Hari Prasad of the National Institute of Fashion Technology in India, and Ms. Danielle Sponder-Testa of Iowa State University. It is narrated by Ms. Danielle Sponder-Testa. It is appropriate to look at two areas of innovation during the retail industrial revolution: the shift from the complex relationships between retailers and suppliers to the simpler and integrated relationships, and the shift from centralized to decentralized management. This is to know what customers want. The shift from complex and often adversarial relationships between retailers and suppliers to a simpler and integrated relationship originated when retailers and suppliers found that it was more beneficial to work together than to fight against each other. Further, part of the collaboration was sparked by the need to make certain that the chain stores had inventories throughout their ever-increasing markets. As retailers started to realize they needed to have specific inventory available for their customers, they realized they need to have a specific amount of that inventory and consistent replenishment. Further, as stores grew larger and as branches expanded, the organizational and spatial distance between top management and department managers, as well as with customers, grew, and decentralization was needed as products, assortment, customers, and marketing feedback was needed from all of the different regions. However, general functions of accounting, finance, and management tended to remain centralized. Sears, a U.S. department store well known for advanced management practices at this time, provided a prime example of the advanced opportunities presented. In 1920, Sears buyers engaged in an aggressive buying program across the board, based on what they thought was an ever-increasing rate of demand. This was without consulting their current inventory. At the end of the year, Sears had inventory in excess of $105 million, a significant amount for Depression-era 1920s. This finding can be found in Chandler, 1962. The assumption of uniformity and consistency in demand across large markets simply was not adequate, and retailers began to learn the need to plan unique assortments. Some retail stores were unable to match their product assortment to local conditions, and as a result, some stores were found that their shelves were bulging with slow-moving items, while other stores were unable to obtain the same item in anything like the quantity they wanted. This is supported in literature by Emmett and Junk in 1950. Traditionally, retailers had taken a narrow view of inventory. It was defined as an asset that was required for business, but not as a variable affecting demand. In fact, the use of the word stock in inventory stock is very revealing of this attitude, for it's stock rather than a supply that can supply demand. As early as 1905, Ernest Katz at R.H. Macy's began to explore ways in which the principles of scientific management that were being developed in manufacturing could be applied to retailing. Katz began to use the most current accounting records originating from retail functions for the management of current operations, rather than regarding them as historic data. What he started was an important shift from mere bookkeeping to the systematic accumulation and analysis of operating facts as the basis for intelligent administration. This was the starting point of inventory management. Then, in 1930, E.A. Filene proposed the model stock plan for basic merchandise based on Katz and Macy's method. His plan introduced several industrial practices that he adapted for retailing. It recognized consumer variation by price level, that inventory should be a flow rather than a static stock, and the importance of variation across stores. The purpose of the model stock plan is to get the right goods at the right time in the right quantities at the right price. The model stock plan provides the means by 6 distinct steps, all closely related, and they form an integrated whole. The procedures are first to identify and determine for any class of merchandise the 3 key price points, the low, medium, and high, at which the largest quantity of merchandise can be sold and the greatest profit can be earned. The second procedure is to concentrate approximately 85% of the stock at those 3 price points. Third, in inventory planning, they should provide a scientific basis for building up a stock that would most profitably meet and beat the competition. Fourth, they should build up full lines of really complete stocks that will turn over rapidly. Fifth, they should consider peaks. This is to regulate the inventory at any given time by the seasonal calendar that shows in detail the customer's buying habits. Sixth, holiday peaks should be considered to regulate a buying calendar that shows in detail when buying goods to one's best advantage. This information can be found on page 316 in the Savitt article published in 1999. Model stock planning and these 6 steps are further discussed on page 1 and 2 of the handout that can be downloaded from our website, which further considers basic merchandise. Model stocks are created for staple merchandise, the merchandise with consistent demand that a retailer always wants to have in stock. Staple merchandise has several characteristics. There are minimal style changes. Sales can be predicted year to year, season to season, and week to week. There's relatively short delivery period, and it's easy to get back in stock. Additionally, there are consistent reorders, typically planned for every X number of weeks, such as every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, or every 12 weeks. Let's consider some key terminology in model stock planning. Rate of sale refers to the average number of units sold during a week. Reserve stock, or RS, is a safety factor. This is to offset any delivery problems, labor difficulties, or other issues that might be encountered. It is basically backup stock to always have on hand. Delivery period, DP, refers to the number of weeks between placement of an order and receipt of goods. Reorder period, or RP, is how often the inventory is reviewed for order placement. To get your minimum stock, which is the least amount you need to have to make sure your sales can be met, you take the reserve stock plus the delivery period, and then you multiply that number by the rate of sale. Make sure that reserve stock plus delivery period is calculated prior to multiplying it by rate of sale. If we want to set a range and get the maximum stock, knowing both our minimum and maximum that we could hold, we would add your reorder period. This is because it's how long it would take until another shipment will come in. To calculate this, we would use a unit calculation, which is our reserve stock plus our delivery period plus our reorder period. Once we've calculated those 3 numbers, we would multiply it again by our rate of sale. Let's go through an example of maximum stock. Here we have an example of a maximum stock equation. You can see in this equation, in the parentheses, we have 1 plus 2 plus 1, and then we multiply those numbers by 150. In this equation, can you remember which number represents the reserve stock? What number represents the delivery period? How about the reorder period? And what represents the rate of sale? If you remember, the first number in the parentheses is the reserve stock. That means we have 1 unit of reserve stock. The delivery period is 2 weeks, the second number in the parentheses. While the third number in the parentheses, 1, represents the reorder period, so that's 1 week. The rate of sale is the final number of 150. Now, in order to calculate our maximum stock, we would just complete this equation taking 1 plus 2 plus 1, multiplying it by 150, to find that our maximum stock is 600 units. Additional terminology to be aware of include terms such as OH, which stands for on hand. This refers to how much inventory you have on hand at a given point in time. OO stands for on order, which is how much inventory is on order at a given point in time. RC stands for received, how much inventory is being received this week. If the delivery period is 1 then you will receive the goods the same week you put those goods on order. If the delivery period is 2, those goods would be received the following week. S stands for sold, so how many goods were sold that week? Now let's look at an example of a basic stock list. Here we can see 3 different vendors. We can see their description, their maximum stock, their on hand, their on order, their goods received, their goods sold, and again their on hand for the following week. This starts a second week when you see the second column of on hand. This also matches a worksheet that's available for you to download. We recommend you stop here and work on the worksheet to test your ability to calculate the various figures available here. A key is also available so you can check your ability to calculate these numbers and figure it out so you can use it in your own business. This is not the only format that can be used for this sort of a calculation. It is just one format that allows you to learn. You'll see on this screen we have some notes on how these figures were calculated. For instance, under the vendor Moonbeams, the maximum stock of 18 was calculated by taking the reserve stock plus the delivery period plus the reorder period of 2 plus 1 plus 3, and then multiplying it by the rate of sale, which was 3, to get a total of 18. These numbers were available for you in a worksheet that can be downloaded. You can then see that the on hand was provided for you, that they already had 6 units left over from the previous week. To get the on order, we can see that they took the max stock minus the on hand of 6 to see how many units are needed, which was 12. Because the delivery period is 1, that means that those 12 units would come in the same week. However, if you had a different vendor with a delivery period of 2 weeks, you would take that 12 units of on order and carry that over to the next week, which isn't visible on this screen. We recommend you do some practice. Complete the remainder of the basic stock list for all weeks for Moonbeams, Ultrastone Blue, Wedding Band, Sheraton, and Stardust. This will help you understand maximum stock, minimum stock, on hand, on order, received stock and delivery periods, and sold merchandise. The most crucial elements to remember to help you complete this worksheet with accuracy is the changing delivery periods. Many variations of model stock plans are used in industry. On the next slide, we'll see another example of calculations. In this example, let's look at a budget in dollar values. We can see this as a Wings total projected sales budget of $15 million. You can see that this is a different way of approaching a projected budget. We can see that of our $15 million, we can break it down by our classes of infants, preschool, boys, and girls. From there, we can then break it down by season of spring, back to school, and winter. And we even have some details here of breaking down our back to school season by category of jackets, tops, and bottoms. As you can see, the label on the screen says girls. We're going to dig into this a little bit in more detail by looking specifically at our girls budget for our Wings assortment. Girls represents 40% of the budget. Now, to calculate the dollar value for girls, we would take 15 million multiplied by 40%. We have to convert 40% to a decimal, which would then be 0.40, and we would find that the budget for girls is $6 million. Do you understand how that was calculated? If not, take a moment and figure that out on your calculator. Now from there, we want to find out the portion of the girls' budget that was attributed to back to school. Take a minute and think about how we would calculate the portion of this total $15 million budget that would be attributed to girls back to school. If you remember, a moment ago, we figured out that $6 million was attributed to girls. To find out which portion of that girls was back to school, we would take that $6 million times the portion of girls that went to back to school, which is 60%. So we would take the 60%, convert it to a decimal, which is 0.60, and multiply it by 6 million to get $3,600,000. Now, let's look at girls' back to school tops, which is 30% of our budget. So we now have from our 15 million that 6 million goes to girls and that 3,600,000 goes to back to school. But what portion of that goes specifically to tops? Well, to calculate that, we would take 3,600,000 times our 30%, which we have to again convert to a decimal to get 0.30 to get $1,080,000. Now let's take a look for infants. Infants represents 15% of the budget, and winter is 60%. How would we calculate that budget? We would take 15% of our 15 million, so once again, we would convert 15% to a decimal to get 0.15, and we would multiply that by our budget of 15 million. That would give us a total of $2,250,000 for the total infants category. Now, if we wanted to calculate what portion of that was for infants winter, we would take 60% of our infants assortment. So we would take 60% converted to a decimal of 0.6 multiplied by our infants budget. Remember, this isn't our total budget of 15 million, it's only our infants budget of 2,250,000. So we take that calculation, 2,250,000 times 0.6 to get 1,350,000. What if we wanted to do this for boys back to school? We could follow the same process, starting with our 15 million, multiplying it by our 25% converted to a decimal of 0.25, we would get 3,750,000. Then we would calculate it by our back to school, which is 70% converted to a decimal of 0.7 to get 2,625,000. Finally, to find out the portion that is bottoms, we would multiply our 2,625,000 by 20% converted to a decimal of 0.2 to find that our boys' back to school bottoms budget is $525,000. These numbers are important to know because while it might seem like we have a lot of money to spend with $15 million, we know that we only actually have $525,000 to spend on back to school bottoms, and we don't want to exceed that available budget. Now we could take this further and look at how much we would want to spend by store and how we'd want to distribute the product. So what if the assortment price point was on average $19.99? Could I find my assortment volume in units? What you would do then is you would take your $525,000 budget that you had for boys' back to school bottoms and you would divide it by your average price point of $19.99 to find that you could buy 26,263 units. Now, if you do this calculation, you will find that there is a decimal. But of course, you can't buy a portion of a unit, so when you're calculating units, you're always going to round to the nearest unit. Now, what if you have 1,300 stores and you want to distribute your bottoms evenly? You would then take these units that you've just calculated, 26,263, and you would divide them by your 1,300 stores to get that you have 20 units per store. This presentation should have taught you about the history of assortment planning and model stock planning. The Savitt 1999 article can be an additional historic resource. Hopefully these tools regarding model stock planning can help you think about how you could use such tools in your business. While these are widely used at large retailers, there's also a lot of opportunity for small business. They can help improve the accuracy of buying and minimize excess stock, helping you know how many units of specific styles you need. While it's of course important to consider the specific customers and clientele you are buying for, their demographics, their taste, and their shopping patterns, it's also important to consider the total quantities needed in a retail business. So continue to think about how these factors will change when you're a small business with one location and a small business with 2 locations, or if you continue to grow. Assortment planning will continue to grow in relevancy. Buying decisions relate to assortment planning and inventory management, which will differ from large to small retailers but continue to be important. We hope that you will take some time to practice model stock planning and assortment planning elements and think about how you can integrate these into your business. Thank you for your time. We hope you will take the time to watch more of our module presentations.